נצטרך להיאבק גם באו"ם וגם בכל הזירות.
Israel's prime minister says his country will fight against a global push for recognition of a Palestinian state. His comments coming earlier today before the announcements by the Canadian and British prime minister. Benjamin Netanyahu has accused countries who recognize a Palestinian state as rewarding, quote, Hamas terrorism. For more reaction to Canada recognizing a Palestinian state, we're joined by Ardi Imseis, Associate Professor and Co-Academic Director of the International Law Program at Queen's University. Thanks so much for being with us today.
Thanks for having me.
You know, people are watching this news unfold throughout the day here today. I'm guessing they're wondering what the implications are of this declaration. Is it purely symbolic?
No, Melissa, it isn't purely symbolic. By no means is it. And that's because once a state recognizes another state, specific legal consequences flow from that. So Canada now takes on legal obligations in respect of, first, the state of Palestine. And some of those obligations are to respect the principle of non-intervention or non-interference in the internal affairs of that state. Also to respect the territorial integrity and political independence of that state. And finally, to respect that state's right to use force in self-defense if it is subjected to unlawful force or aggression. And in the case of Palestine, all three of those things are live. The International Court of Justice, just in the summer of 2024, July 19, in fact, declared that Israel's continued presence in the occupied Palestinian territory is an ongoing use of force since 1967 that is unlawful. And therefore, Israel has an obligation to withdraw from the territory. But most importantly, all third states, including Canada, have an obligation to do nothing to aid or assist Israel in its continued presence in the occupied Palestinian territory. And now that Canada has recognized this territory as belonging to the Palestinian people who are sovereign in their state of Palestine to the exclusion of all other people, Canada must adjust its bilateral policies vis-a-vis Israel. So one good example of that is the need for Canada now to either abrogate or suspend, at the very least, its free trade agreement with Israel. Why? Because that free trade agreement defines Israel territory as including the occupied Palestinian state, which Canada is now recognizing. So there will be a great deal, and that's just one example of consequences that flow. There will be a great deal of legal consequences that flow for the state of Palestine in its bilateral relations. And I think this move needs to be seen in the larger context of what's happening now on the ground. The Israelis have made it clear, as Prime Minister Carney's statement also made clear and acknowledged, that there will be, in their view, no Palestinian state established between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea on their watch. And they're in the process of ethnically cleansing the Gaza Strip, and calls are openly being made to resettle the Gaza Strip with Israeli settlers and so on. In effect, Israel is destroying any prospect for two states, any prospect of a Palestinian state establishing itself in these areas. And so the Canadians have now decided the time is now to move. Is it enough? Well, pro-Palestinian advocates will say it's not, because in the face, again, of what the International Court of Justice has determined in January 2024 is a plausible genocide of the Palestinian people, people are worried on the Palestinian side that this would be merely symbolism. And so the proof is going to be in the pudding. Canada's recognition is a positive thing, but can only be positive and is only as good as the political willingness of Canadian leadership to impose a raft of sanctions on Israel to ensure, first and foremost, that it withdraw from occupied Palestine, that it cease the genocide, plausible genocide, in the words of the ICJ, against the Palestinian people, and ultimately that it sit down at the table with the Palestinian state and resolve this thing in accordance with international law.
I wonder what you expect might happen here when we're seeing a number of these Western allies, UK coming out today with this statement as well, their relationships, including Canada's with the US, with Israel going forward from this moment.
Well, there's certainly a sign going, a coordinated sign from the G7 minus Germany and the United States for the most part, but basically Canada and the Commonwealth countries to Washington to say, your persistence in support, blind support of Israel in its vengeance on the Palestinian people, which is produced in 23 months, a minimum of 65,000 Palestinian dead, 2/3 of whom women and children, 1.9 million Palestinians, that's almost 85% of the population of the occupied Gaza Strip forcibly transferred, all of them subjected to carpet bombing, starvation as a tool of war, and so on. Your blind support, Washington, of this policy is leading to nowhere. In fact, it's getting things a lot worse than they left them 23 months ago. So the point is, it's a good sign that the United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, Portugal, Malta, Luxembourg, and others are joining the rest of the international community, now 150 states who already recognize the state of Palestine, to say enough is enough. The real question will be, to what extent will these latecomers to the party, the Western states who are now recognizing Palestine, back that recognition up with robust sanctions on the Israeli occupying power who is committing an ongoing aggression in the occupied state of Palestine? Not my view, but the view of the International Court of Justice.
I wonder if I could just ask you one more question. I'm wondering what you're expecting from the UN General Assembly this week.
Well, on the GA agenda this week, the top issue on the agenda is the question of Palestine. And there is something that about 145 member states have come together to negotiate, including Canada, over the past few months. They've negotiated something called the New York Declaration. And this declaration, which is available in the public realm, you could look it up online, is a declaration by these 145 states on how to end the conflict in Israel-Palestine in accordance with international law. The executive summary of it is to ensure that Israel, as the occupying power, abide by its international legal obligations, withdraw from the occupied territory, that all detained persons, including hostages or otherwise, are released by all parties to the conflict, that Israel withdraw from the rest of the Gaza Strip, etc., and that all parties put their arms down, and that the Palestinian Authority, such as it is allowed to exercise authority and unify the West Bank, Gaza Strip, and East Jerusalem. The idea is that there should be a two-state solution. It is the best way forward for a pacific dispute resolution over this problem in the face of an occupying power who's full of vengeance, like I said, and whose leadership, as a matter of public record, has made it clear they've no intention of allowing the establishment of a Palestinian state. They want all of occupied Palestine for themselves, and they're pursuing a policy course to that end.
Ardi Imseis sharing your perspective with us today on this pressing issue. Thank you so much for that.